Violence has returned to Tahrir Square. People power toppled President Mubarak. Now it has turned on Egypt's military rulers. Hard Talk is on the road in a country preparing for elections, but precariously close to chaos. Central Cairo, once again a crucible for confrontation. In the last few days, democracy activists and Egypt's security forces have been fighting running battles in and around Tahrir Square. These protesters have lost all trust in Egypt's military rulers. Some are now calling for a second revolution to bring down the generals. And this is no overnight storm. Tension and anger have been brewing for months. Field Marshal Mohammed Hussein Tantawi has been Egypt's military ruler since President Mubarak was toppled. He promised stability. He's delivered bloodshed and repression. Now the protesters say he, like his old boss Mubarak, must go. October the 9th was a turning point in the course of Egypt's revolution. Thousands of demonstrators, mostly Coptic Christians, gathered outside the state television building, protesting about a spate of sectarian attacks. The response was brutal. Protesters were hit by sniper fire, then by armored vehicles which careered down the street. 27 demonstrators were killed. The forces of repression had made their mark. It's almost as though Egypt is now reliving the momentous days of January. Last Friday, the square was filled with Islamist and secular protesters demanding an end to military rule and the release of thousands of activists convicted in military courts. Once again, the internet is stoking up revolutionary fervour. When he's not out on Tahrir Square, web designer Tarek Shalaby is blogging and organising, part of a network committed to confronting what he sees as a military counter-revolution. Tarek Shalaby, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We all talk about the Egyptian revolution. In your opinion, has the revolution happened, or is it really yet to happen?
I'd say the revolution is just getting started. I think that's the best way to put it.
And why do you sound so cautious?
Well, because when we took the streets on January 25th, in fact, when we've been taking the streets for years, it wasn't because we just wanted to get rid of Mubarak. It was because we wanted the downfall of the regime. We wanted to completely destroy the regime. It's useless to get rid of Mubarak and get someone else who will keep the same policies, who will maintain the corruption, and who will keep torturing and killing the Egyptians. That's not what we want. We want to completely overhaul the system. And that's why we need to continue. If we were to accept what we have now, then what we've done is minimal reform.
To what extent do you feel yourself to be a marked man in Egypt today?
Well, obviously going through military trial and spending a couple of days in military prison and having a hanging sentence on me that's been suspended does make it seem like I'm more marked than the average person.
Yeah, let's be clear, when you say a hanging, you mean a sentence which could yet be implemented. You were given, what, 1 year suspended?
Exactly.
If you run into trouble again, you're going inside.
Yes, I'll serve that year. But let's be frank with each other. I mean, almost every single revolutionary Egyptian has that risk, whether or not they've been through military trial or not. Just because if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, if they're not happy with it, and if they want to crack down on protesters like they've been doing over the past few months, then they don't need any excuse for it. They can throw you right in military prison.
And what does that mean? I mean, you got a brief taste of it. In May, when you were arrested after a demonstration, you went through the military process. And what did you learn from it?
Well, like for example, you get the welcome message, as they call it in military prison. We were all in our cells, and they were running out of cells, even though the military prison is huge, but they just keep bringing in thousands. And so we were in our cells one night, and we saw a new group being welcomed. And they were strip searched, and they were beaten by hose and sticks and what have you, and being tortured and humiliated right in front of us. So because that's just the welcome that they get for coming to military prison.
But what I'm getting to is the psychological relationship now between the military and people like you who regard yourselves as revolutionaries. Is there a sense of hatred between them and you? I mean, what is the relationship?
I think it's difficult to generalize, but I can tell you that the military council especially is very wary of revolutionary Egyptians in general. And the revolutionaries, well, obviously opinions differ. Some people aren't totally against the military, others are just against the leaders, others want to get on with the elections. I'm just completely against the entity because it's a complete corrupt entity that needs to be cleansed out of all corruption. But I can tell you that there are thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands who take the streets every day knowing that there is a bit of a hanging risk. And we do that because we think it's the best for everyone.
Honestly, Tariq Shalaby, how representative are you? Here you sit before me, westernized, university educated, spent some time in the United States, sound frankly almost as much American as you are Egyptian. There is a charge against some of the Tahrir revolutionaries that they are not connected to the mass of Egyptian people. That's true, isn't it?
I would agree that a lot of the people on the Twitter sphere and the blogosphere get carried away into thinking that they represent the majority when they're actually closed in on a social network. That is true. However...
And you're part of that closed elite circle of revolutionaries, the sort of champagne socialists, no?
I find myself in that atmosphere, if you will, but I try to remain on the ground as much as possible so as not to lose conscious and not to lose the sense of reality and think that the hundreds of people that I'm speaking with on Twitter represent all of Egypt.
What is your best weapon? You're not going to turn weapons on the military council, so what is your best weapon?
Our best weapon are the numbers. We're a lot of people. Right now it does seem like we're a minority, but the thing is, with time the military is committing more and more errors. We might not have weapons, we might not have experience, but we have numbers, and that's a lot more than the military can handle.
Tariq Shalaby, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Egyptians have lost their fear of speaking out, but criticizing the generals can have dark consequences. I drove into central Cairo to meet the media revolutionaries determined to challenge the red lines imposed by the military. 25 TV is a new network named after the day the revolution started in January. Almost all the staff here are young people plucked from the Tahrir demonstrations. They say they're trying to wean Egyptians off a diet of state propaganda. But when 25 TV broadcast live pictures of the October the 9th killings, armed troops raided the studio. The presenter's scream became an internet sensation. Shahira Amin is one of the country's best-known television journalists. She quit state TV in protest at censorship when the revolution began. Then new managers came in and persuaded her to return, promising an end to all interference, credible or not. Shahira Amin, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
How much genuine freedom does the media in Egypt have today?
Very little. I'm afraid to say there's been a regression in freedom since the revolution. We thought things would be different. At the beginning there was this little ray of light because new channels, new television channels were being launched, new publications, and I saw that it was becoming a more vibrant media with greater diversity. But you know, all our hopes were dashed when the Minister of Information came out and said no more permits for new channels. The emergency law has been revitalized, as you know, which allows for arrests and of civilians without charge, including journalists. There's been a lot of intimidation. A lot of my friends were summoned by the military prosecutor for investigation. I've received warnings about some of my stories, and what I'm seeing is we've gone back.
I'm just a little puzzled by your own personal decision-making, because you quit as the revolution unfolded in January and February you walked away from your job at state television, Nile TV, and you said you felt liberated after years of hypocrisy. And yet you now again work for Nile TV. Why?
I went back 2 months after the uprisings because I thought this is the new Egypt. Hopefully, you know, you can only push for reforms as an insider. And I thought it's a national duty to go back and try and, you know, push the boundaries of freedom if I can. I'm only back doing a weekly program because I have control over the content.
Do you really? Do you really have control?
Well, so far so good. There's been no meddling.
I spoke to one very senior media executive just yesterday here in Cairo. He didn't want to be named, but he said this to me. He said, what the Egyptian state media is broadcasting today is a crime against the people of Egypt. They seem to be undermining everything that the revolution was supposed to stand for.
I totally agree with every word. That's what they did during the revolution. They gave a distorted picture of what was happening. They continued to lie to the public, and they continue to do it today. It used to be Mubarak that they, you know, he was the red line. Now it's the SCAF that's the red line, and they continue.
And when you say SCAF, you mean the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces?
They are the new red line, and the censorship continues. And I'm sorry to tell you, it's more self-censorship. People are so scared, they're worried, because they've lived for years under repressive rule. And so they have this built-in fear inside them. They continue to practice self-censorship.
It's difficult to tell the truth, though, if you know the cost can be extraordinarily high. And I'm not just thinking of your own circumstances, but if you look around Egypt today, there are people who are being imprisoned, who allegedly are being abused as well because of things they are saying. I'm thinking, for example, of the Michael Nabil case, a blogger who wrote things about the military didn't like. He ended up being sentenced to 3 years hard labor.
He was tried in a military court just for expressing his views on Facebook. All Michael Nabil did was write, you know, his own views. He said the people in the army aren't one, and he gets a 3-year jail sentence. This is, I don't know how to describe it, but I feel so angry when I think about that this is the new Egypt, and we thought we would get our freedom, that we would be able to express our views freely.
Shahira Ramy, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank
Shahira,
you.
Thank you.
Condemnation of the current military regime is spreading. Alexandria, Egypt's Mediterranean second city, is a hotbed of political frustration. It's evident in the sermons from the mosques.
الحيلة الذين أفسدوا في البلاد والذين أفسدوا السياسة والذين لم يتركوا وسيلة من تخريب هذا البلد.
Many Egyptians are unwilling to let the army keep the old order intact. This is a society on edge, now marked by mistrust and thwarted expectations of change.
Friday prayers has just ended, and as you can see, there are hundreds of people around the mosque, and a real sense of political debate is developing. If we look at some of the posters that people have brought to show to the public outside the mosque, why are you here today?
Because the revolution it must be continued.
Do you think there's a danger it will not be continued?
Yeah. We have no constitution right now. We are under the governation of SCAF.
When you say SCAF, you mean the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces?
Yes.
And you do not trust them?
Yes.
You believe they are the old Mubarak people?
Yes. Sure. Yes.
What do you...
The regime of Mubarak didn't go out.
Didn't go?
No.
Unstable, fearful, Egypt is now dangerously polarized. I headed towards the narrow streets of Cairo's Khan al-Khalili market. Here, traders have seen political turmoil scare off tourists and hobble the economy. And from Abdullah and Saeed, a reminder that many Egyptians still see the army as Egypt's best guarantee of stability.
Why do you believe that Field Marshal Tantawi and all of his friends who used to be close to Mubarak, why do you believe they really want democracy?
Because we are with our heart with the Tantawi and his groups. You know why? Because it's too heavy.
Yes.
Mubarak put him in a very hard situation.
Do the Egyptian people really trust the army?
Yes, 100% trust with the army. All the people, they know the army. It's very good.
The army is beginning to look like it doesn't really believe in democracy.
No.
You two have made it quite clear that you are prepared to trust the army, but how long do you want the military to be in control of this country?
1 year is enough to protect the way of choice.
Yeah, and protect the people while they're making the choice.
Yeah, that's it, for a year. And to put us at the way of the democratics. And we need democratic step by step.
Egypt is once again on the edge of chaos. Voting is supposed to start in parliamentary elections next week, but right now this country's path to democracy is littered with obstacles. The ruling military council rebuffed my request for an interview, but before this latest surge in violence, I did meet one member of an increasingly beleaguered government.
Shaimaa, welcome to Hard Talk. As a minister in the government, you are responsible, ultimately, to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. Are you convinced of their commitment to democracy and freedom?
أنا واثق من التزامهم اتجاه الديمقراطية والحرية، وواثق إن هم عاوزين ينقلوا السلطة لسلطة مدنية منتخبة، وده واضح جدا في كل اجتماعاتنا كحكومة مع المجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة.
You say it is clear. If it is so clear, why, for example, is a state of emergency still in place in this country 10 months after the revolution?
الحقيقة أنه كان هناك اتجاه واضح جدا لدى الحكومة، وكان هناك التزام من الحكومة لأنه يتم إلغاء هذه الحالة قبل بدء الانتخابات البرلمانية. إنما حصل متغير مؤسف الحقيقة يوم 9 سبتمبر الماضي، أنه حصل فيه بعض الهجمات اللي هي خارج نطاق القانون على مقر وزارة الداخلية، على السفارة الإسرائيلية في القاهرة، على مديرية أمن الجيزة، وبعض هذه الهجمات طال السفارة السعودية. وهذا الأمر أوضح أن هناك في محاولات للمساس بالأمن في مصر، فتقرر أنه يتم مد حالة الطوارئ لبعض الوقت، إنما هناك نية حقيقية حتى هذه اللحظة لإلغائها في أسرع وقت ممكن عقب أن تستتب الأمور الأمنية في البلاد.
Despite the fact we are only days away from nationwide parliamentary elections, you're telling me that as far as you're concerned there is still a sense of and a state of emergency here.
الحقيقة أنه يعني حالة الطوارئ احنا عندنا في التزام رئيسي في الحكومة والمجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة ان احنا نجري انتخابات برلمانية تؤدي بينا في النهاية إلى وجود برلمان منتخب بشكل ديمقراطي حر يعبر تعبير دقيق وأمين عن كل فئات المجتمع. لازم نضع في اعتبارنا ان احنا في أعقاب ثورة، هناك بعض القوى التي لا تريد أن نصل إلى هذه النتيجة.
A functioning democracy is about more than just voting and going to the polls. It's about all of the institutions of a civil society, not least the courts and the judiciary. And what we see right now in Egypt are military courts, and we see civilian protesters, thousands of them, being put before military courts and being sent to military prisons. That doesn't look like democracy.
هذا الأمر توقف تماما خلال الفترة الماضية، وتم الاستبدال حالة المدنيين المحاكم العسكرية إلى محاكم أمن الدولة، وبالتالي لم يعد هناك حالة للمدنيين المحاكم العسكرية إلا في الحالات التي نص عليها قانون الأحكام العسكرية، اللي هي في حالة أن يكون طرف معتدى عليه أو خلافه من العسكريين.
That isn't right, is it? I mean, there are still people going to the military courts. We have, for example, bloggers who have been sentenced inside a military court to years in prison because of things they have written. It's still happening in this country.
لا لا لا، هذا لم يحدث قبل التاريخ ده. قبل شهر 9 الماضي، قبل شهر سبتمبر، كان هناك في إحالة لبعض المدنيين للمحاكم العسكرية. هذا الأمر توقف بقرار من المجلس الأعلى للقوات المسلحة.
The Ministry of Information was one of the symbols of the Mubarak regime. It was a place where censorship took place. It was where the press was manipulated. If you wanted to make a break with the past, why do you continue to sit in your chair as Minister of Information? Would it not have been better to abandon this concept altogether?
أنا الحقيقة لست مع نظام مبارك. قعدت 25 سنة معارض لنظام الرئيس السابق حسني مبارك، ونحن الآن لا نعمل في نظام الرئيس السابق حسني مبارك، والآليات التي كان يعمل بها مبارك تغيرت تماما.
Well, let me quote to you some words from Shahira Amin, who has long experience of Egyptian state TV and radio. She's worked inside it for more than 20 years. These are her words, not mine. The army is in complete control of the media. They've simply replaced Mubarak, and they are now even more intimidating to the press than they were before.
لا، ليس صحيحا على الإطلاق، مع كامل احترام الأستاذة شهيرة أمين. إنما أنا بؤكد لك أن هذه الآليات تغيرت تماما، وأنا ما كنت أكتبه قبل كده بالنسبة لحرية الإعلام هو اللي أنا مصر عليه دلوقتي. لا يمكن في ظل ثورة قامت من أجل الحرية أنه يحصل فيه تراجع عن الحريات، وأولها حرية الإعلام، ولن أكون أنا هذا الشخص اللي يعمل تراجع في حرية الإعلام.
If this spirit of change that you talk about is genuine, why is it that the boss of radio and television, Mr. Tawat Meki, is a senior figure from the old ruling party, the National Democratic Party, which has been disbanded? Why didn't you fire him?
هو في خلط الحقيقة في هذه الأمور. لا، أنا جبته لأنه هو رجل يعمل في إطار عمل بيقوم بيه بشكل جيد، إنما هذه مرحلة ما تقدرش تنقل فيها كل حاجة بشكل يعني جذري في مرة واحدة، إنما هناك نية حقيقية للتغيير. الحزب الوطني انتهى، الرموز اللي كانت محتكة قوي بالحزب الوطني احنا مستبعدينها تماما. الدكتور ثروت مكي كان مجرد عضو في الحزب الوطني وليس عنصر فاعل لهذا الحد اللي البعض بيحاولوا يصوره.
I find your answer very difficult to understand. It seems to me quite simple. There is no question he was a senior figure inside the old ruling party. He was an acolyte of Hosni Mubarak, and he still sits inside your own state TV and radio as the boss. Why not get rid of him?
لا، شخصية كبيرة، يعني شخصية قيادية. وهنا داخل مبنى اتحاد الإذاعة والتلفزيون هناك شخصيات كانت تحتل مناصب أكبر منه بكثير داخل الحزب الوطني، أنا مستبعدها تمام.
I've spoken to many journalists who know you from your previous life as a writer and journalist here in Egypt, and they say that they are deeply disappointed that you decided to take a role where you are nothing more than a puppet for your military masters.
لا 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 لا، لست دمية، وأنا اللي رشحني هو رئيس مجلس الوزراء، ولا ألعب دور لا مع المجلس العسكري ولا مع مجلس الوزراء يتناقض مع مبادئي أنا الشخصية. إذا كان البعض شايف أنه أنا اللي بعمله مش مناسب معاه، ده يبقى موضوعه هو، إنما مش من حق أحد أنه يتهمني بمثل هذه الاتهامات، خاصة أنها القوات المسلحة المصرية وهي المؤسسة المصرية الوطنية اللي موجودة، وبالتالي الانتماء ليها رغم أنه يعني بهذا المعنى اللي هم بيقولوه مش حقيقي، إنما الانتماء ليها ليس عيبا على الإطلاق.
Osama Hakel, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk. Thank you. Shukran, Awi. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Egypt's revolution is claiming new casualties. 10 months ago, the armed forces positioned themselves as the protectors of the people, the guardians of democratic transition. That is fast losing credibility. For now, Egyptians remain caught between repression and revolution.